Good morning and welcome to another OSW Daily. Today, I'm very happy to welcome guest speaker Neil Usher. Neil is an author, internationally renowned experienced senior property, workplace, facilities, and change management leader. And we're going to hear a number of his views and perspectives on some of the content he's written, some of the books he's written, and some content that we've actually come across on the web. And Neil's provided a article from the 1990 almost feels like in around schedules and makers and manager schedule that we're going to dig into. Also about webinars, conferences, his views on that. But also Neil provided last week a very good summary of what workplace requires and what he's heard in the from everybody chatting on social media on workplace in the future of workplace. So we're going to dig into a number of those things today. But first of all, I just want to say thank you. And Neil, welcome to OSW Daily. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate it. Delighted to be here. And hello, everyone.
Thank you, man. Thank you. So it's and sort of as we sort of dig into this, Neil, I think you have a very unique perspective. You've walked the walk. You've worked in organizations. You've managed real estate facilities and workplaces. You've then went to the other side of the fence, if you want, provided consultancy services to that group, and then you've written a how-to guide in sort of books and how to create those sort of things. So I think you provide a very great, unique perspective. But that's how I would sum you up. How would you sort of summarize you and who you are?
I think I'd struggle to convince anyone that any of this was planned. I think it's sort of expedient moves at different times. But yes, I've spent time on both sort of what we would probably regard as the supply and the demand side. Been in the whole sort of corporate real estate business really since 1992. And just before that, I got a master's in IT. So in now working with a software company, it took me 28 years to get a job in tech via real estate, but I finally managed it and I've sort of bridged the gap between the two. But yes, I spent probably most of my time in this industry working for large organizations, managing international portfolios, Warner Brothers, Honeywell, Rio Tinto, and the last of those, Sky. So I sort of hope I still bring a kind of corporate real estate client-side perspective to what I do. I did a couple of years with Trammell Crow Savills, a fairly short-lived JV back in 2000, which was my first taste of life on the supply side. That was pretty scary, so I went back to the corporate side again. And last sort of 3 years or so, I've been out in the world rebuilding a network that sort of was sort of sidelined a little while I was doing all of the work at Sky, and trying to see as much of the world and as many different workplaces as possible in that time.
It's funny that you said you studied IT and then you kind of get into workplace. I often find people fall into workplace and fall in love with it. I don't know, how did you get into workplace? Because I can't imagine studying IT, that's where you dreamed of going.
At the time, and I've made a habit of leaving university in the middle of a recession. So if ever I go back to uni again, I'd sort of have a really
short the market.
What
yeah,
you're about.
Yeah,
yeah absolutely. At the time, there was much talk of the hybrid manager, and what was meant of at the time was that business leaders were really struggling to talk to IT people and vice versa. So there was a lot of government money around to fund people who'd done arts or social science courses to go back to university and study IT. So I took advantage of that, left my full-time job and took the risk. And I was convinced I was going to come out as one of these hybrid managers, being able to sort of talk to the IT team and business and spend time in both and be this new breed of business leader. The recession put paid to that. I was working at Warner Music before I went back to uni, and they said, look, now you've got your IT qualification, there's a piece of work we really need you to do. So I did 3 months as a systems analyst. That was my sort of IT career really at that time, because they said, we've got this vacancy for facilities manager and we kind of know you, we think you're the right sort of character and your approach is good, so would you be interested? So we had a chat about it, and I said, you've got to be kidding. There is no way that I went back to uni, gave up my job to do a master's in IT to become a facilities manager. And we had another few chats about it, and I said, look, I'll do it for a year. And I taught myself FM. I had an office that looked like a bomb site full of all the old contracts and paperwork, and then next door was a completely empty office full of very sort of nice, neat shelves and just waiting for someone to occupy it. So I basically moved everything subject by subject from the full office to the empty office, and on the way by engaging with the supply side and contractors and things, I basically sort of over the space of that year taught myself FM. I thought it was fantastic, so loved it. So I said, look, I know I signed a 1-year contract, but I'd like this to be my proper job, and that's how it all began.
No, that's fantastic, and I find that's what most people find, because I don't know what your experience is. I certainly know whenever I get into workplace in 2014, 2015, whenever it was the ability to directly impact employees and provide that support. That's where, for me, that's where all the enjoyment comes from, and the ability to sort of upskill, as we go. I don't know if you find that too.
Oh, the learning opportunity is phenomenal. It's not just a sort of it's not just vertically integrated as a business, but it's also horizontally really broad. You cover so many different subject areas. Each one of those is like a little window on another universe, with its own suppliers and jargon and sort of history and things. And each one of every time I opened another one of these little windows, it was fascinating. And I was lucky as well, because my first FM job covered just about everything that used to be on the sort of tick lists in those days of what FM embodied. With the very few recruitment consultants in those days used to have that tick list, and if you wanted another FM job, they used to post you this tick list, and you said, yeah, I'll do all of this, and you post it back. And my first job, I pretty much ticked every box, and I thought, well, actually, I'm in a pretty good place here. I'm learning a lot, because if I can tick all these boxes, then I've got a handle on all of this. And also the BIFM had just been formed from the old, I think it was AFM and IFM, which were two professional bodies, came together. There was a real sense in those days in the UK that something was happening. This new profession was being born, and I thought, probably for the first time so far, I'm into something at the start, and that gives me a good opportunity to shape the profession and shape a career.
And obviously that career has evolved, right? And you sort of think about the companies you've worked for and some of the projects you're well known for. And I think Sky, I don't know whether you would see Sky as the pinnacle, but certainly from an outsider looking in, given where Sky were at the time, what they were trying to achieve, it was a remarkable workplace design and on what everything you implemented there. And I don't know if you felt the same way, or whether you look at things differently just because of the emotional attachment you may have to other things.
I think in each of the roles there were always projects or schemes or ideas that you felt a particular sort of pride about or emotional attachment to at the time. At Rio Tinto, I spent 7 years on leading the redevelopment of number 6 St James's Square, which was a fascinating project. Just amazing to be involved in something with such a long heritage. I used to be the representative of the company at the St James's Trust, which was a body that was St James's Square Trust, which was a body that was formed in 1650 something. And you used to meet in these rooms like the Waterloo room of this sort of military club or something, and you'd be talking about issues related to St James's Square, and you think, God, this is a corporate real estate day job. This is really fascinating. So you would, in each one of these roles, there was always something that was fascinating that you would get involved in that you hadn't before. I got involved in deer management in Scotland at Rio Tinto as well. I knew nothing about how deer sort of eat their way across the countryside and back again and rewild in countryside, but when Rio Tinto bought Alcan, they were one of the largest landowners in Scotland. And there was a big campaign to rewild a lot of the highlands, and a lot of that land had been owned by Alcan. So suddenly I'm into sort of wild deer management and fencing schemes and all these kind of things. So yes, you can often go off at these tangents in this sort of industry and find yourself in some very odd and fascinating places.
Yeah, well, I guess that kind of helps describe how you were able to cultivate your experience, but also your knowledge and grasping those knowledge. And over time, I have to imagine you synthesized your approach in collecting information, gathering information, then to really understand different organizations on how they would roll out a workplace, design a workplace given the functions that are going there. And obviously all that culminated in your book, The Elemental Workplace. So this is a book that actually you signed for me one time when you actually presented in New York, and I'm sure it's so memorable for you actually signing it for me, so I appreciate that. But in essence, what motivated you to sort of put something together? Because it really is a how-to guide and very practical elements are put in place there.
I think what really started it was when I was sort of touring a number of people around Sky Central, because there was a big interest in it. So I used to spend a fair amount of time talking through the story and showing people the workplace and describing how it all came to be. But I think one day one person just said, well, why do we need a fantastic workplace? And I completely stopped in my tracks and thought, I've got to be able to answer this question succinctly and clearly, with conviction, and knowing that it's the right answer. And I thought, actually, I would struggle to answer that in that manner. So I sort of took myself away and started to sketch out how I might answer that question. And that really sort of raised my consciousness that after so many years in this business, it actually becomes really difficult to succinctly capture what you want to convey. We get so lost in the detail, in the scope of the work we're involved in, that sometimes we sort of lose the ability to stand back from it and be really clear on sort of, what we believe, why we believe it, and how that came into being. So I think that was probably the root of thinking, maybe there's room for being able to sort of create some kind of frameworks or models that help us, not just as individuals, but as a collective, as an industry, to be able to make our case. Because we're all, if there's one common theme through all of the roles in the different sectors and companies and industries I've worked in, it's, you're always called on to make a case at some point for what you believe to be the right approach or the right strategy. And how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're convincing, that you're bringing the right evidence to bear, that you're able to state that without just sort of coming up with sort of, it'll increase productivity or something, that sort of everybody kind of always says but can't prove. So that's really how it all started to form. And I probably, while I was at Sky, mentioned, maybe I'm thinking of writing a book. And then, of course, everybody said, yeah, go on, you got to do it. And after a little while, I found myself and got myself into a situation where I thought I really have to do this now. So literally, I left Sky on a Friday morning and sat down with a blank screen on a Monday and thought, right, I'm going to write a book. And then I thought I'll probably go and get another coffee first before I start, and there it all began.
No, it's great. Look, and I'm grateful that you did, and I know lots of people are, because it really is a how-to guide. And you do note, and I'm just going to read it because I don't want to misquote you, but everyone deserves a fantastic workplace to live, learn, grow, and contribute. And by workplace, you meant the office, and you were very deliberate about that. Now, given where we are today, what the office means to everybody today, is there certain elements of that, not that statement, but in essence, elements of the book that you think you would have changed given today's environment, or are the lessons still applicable given, work needs to be done. The place where work takes place may have changed, but still the actual factors behind it remain the same.
I thought long and hard about that sort of during lockdown. I wrote a post probably about halfway through the period when we were actually locked down, saying that the workplace will always be elemental. And I did relate each of the 12 elements to sort of developments really during lockdown and the possible futures that we were facing. And I think it is still very much applicable. In some instances probably more applicable. But I also think we're probably, like a lot of the ideas we're talking about now have been fermenting and developing for a number of years, but I think we really are in an instance now where we're facing the possibility of the workplace itself just becoming unnaturally accepted to be one amongst many places of work. So instead of talking about the workplace, the corporate workplace will become one of those places of work. And we've had these ideas for a while about sort of co-working, mixing corporate office and co-working spaces and cafe working, and the forerunner of co-working, which was jellies and these sorts of things, and sort of mixing it all up. But we've never really had to face the possibility that that the corporate workplace might change significantly, or we'd be denied access to it. So it's always been a choice, and most of the time we've been required when working for companies to show up as often as possible. So I think there's a little adaptation that's required in terms of applying it to other places of work. But I think whether it's a local co-working space that you're using instead of the commute to the corporate office, or even looking at the home office. I mean, those people who are fortunate enough to actually have the space to create a home office. How have you thought through the composition of that office, and how does it support you ergonomically? And does everything that happens in that space happen in the way you want it to, or has it just been an expedient reaction to the circumstances? So I think the framework applies, whichever place of work we're talking about. But I'm certainly not one of those who thinks the office is dead. I certainly don't think the corporate workplace is dead by any means. It's just a useful pause where we rethink some of its purpose and some of the way that we will manage it, and ensure that we sort of live and grow with that work and learn with that workplace as well going forward.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And what I find is when I've read back through, be it lessons, be it frameworks, be it methodologies, looking at those things through this lens that we're operating in today, I get different meaning from things. Do you think your book has different meanings today than it did whenever you first published it?
It's really difficult for me to tell because I'm so close to it that it would be hard for me to fathom that. And I guess when I wrote the post about saying the workplace will always be elemental, we were sort of well into lockdown and we weren't really sure where it was headed from there. So it probably needs a revisit, in the near future, probably towards the end of the year. But I think that as the corporate workplace itself finds its new purpose, its reason for being, and determines the way that it's actually going to support what we do, I still think that framework will apply. And I set out to create a framework that was completely transferable. It didn't matter which industry or sector or culture or location or level of spend, it would apply in just about anywhere by dialing some of the elements up and some of them down as you needed to, but they would always be all included and considered. And I think this is just a challenge that I hadn't foreseen, but I'm rather hoping that it's a challenge that the book can still meet, and the framework will still apply whatever situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and you do state in the book, workplace is always a journey, it's never a destination. And as we think about, today, organizations, workplace professionals are trying to figure out, okay, what is the end game? How do we get to that? Because I think we're really good at, whenever we know what the solution needs to be, we're really good at getting from A to B. Not knowing where that destination is going to be, it can be tough. What sort of guidance can you give to people in a sense of when you really don't know the destination, but we know it's a journey? What sort of guidance can you give to that?
I think it's one of the most important points in the book, really, is that we're very good as an industry at working out what the end game will be and creating this sort of static reality. Our whole industry, when you think about it, the whole sort of strategy, design, delivery industry, furniture industry, it's all about creating something that will last as long as possible when we've created it. And then when we had sort of ideas like the agile workplace and the activity-based workplace, it sort of gave us a little bit of breathing space. We can create a static reality, and that ebb and flow may well just about manage to make sure that this lasts a little bit longer than 5 years, maybe. But we're all geared to the static reality. And actually, what's happened during the last 6 months, and what will continue to happen, is that it will sort of completely undermine the notion that static realities is an end game that workplace needs to aim towards and to deliver. This is about a sort of rolling with, understanding change, rolling with change, continually measuring, adjusting. One of the phrases that I think we very often accidentally let slip but wish we hadn't is the new normal. And this sort of idea somehow that it's all going to go back to a relatively comfortable, relatively uninterrupted way of living. I just don't see that. I think we're into a period of many years of having to live with change and understand that we can create landing points, stopping off points that are beneficial to us for a period of time, but we have to be prepared and ready to move again very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I don't think your statement has been ever more relevant than it is a journey. It isn't a destination. I think we have to be comfortable with that, understanding that we're going to deliver what we need to deliver for today or for the next 6 months. Understanding again that in 6 months' time things will change, perspectives will change, organizations' demands, employees' demands will change, just as we evolve. And so obviously you've wrote this book, and you've talked to me off camera about what a wonderful ordeal that was putting that together, all the publicity and the marketing, and how much you thoroughly enjoyed all that. And then you decided to go and do it again by writing this new book that you're going to publish later this year called Elemental Change. So what convinced you to do it again?
Yeah, I think you sort of, you have to question your own sanity at times with these things, and I've done that many times, and I've faced innumerable bouts of self-doubt and imposter syndrome during the course of probably the last 18 months or so. But I think sort of what was gnawing away at me was there was a really good reaction in a number of quarters to the sort of 3 or 4 pages of the Elemental Workplace that looked at an approach to change that was quite reflective of the same framework that the Elemental Workplace created and deployed. My first pass at this was thinking that I could somehow write a concise guide to change, and the publisher had a series that sort of reflected that. I think it's about sort of 22 to 25,000 words, and I realized that was just nowhere near enough to get across what I wanted to. And I thought, well, why don't I just use the same framework that I created for the Elemental Workplace and see if that works? There must be, the framework itself, if you remove all of the subject matter, the framework itself must in some way be transferable. So I sort of started over time through looking back through blog posts and looking at what I've written and just sort of train reading and that kind of stuff. I started to sort of fill in the gaps of that framework and realized that actually I thought it could work. And also one of the sort of the messages in the Elemental Workplace that I sort of repeat quite often is that we're leaders of change first. Very often in workplace, change is seen as a downstream plug-in. We're doing this big, important workplace project, and at some point in time, when we think we're ready, we'll plug in someone to do the change. Actually, the project, the change element of that started, long before the project ever began, and it will continue long after the project is ever complete, if not sort of, infinite. And so, consequently, at all of this, I sort of implore people in workplace and property to see themselves first and foremost as leaders of change, and then secondary to that, so leaders of workplace. Whatever sort of profession or whatever we make up, but I mean that's never reflected in a corporate hierarchy where you have a sort of head of corporate real estate and then the head of workplace, and somewhere in a sort of fairly junior role is someone who or external party is someone who leads the change project. But actually, the whole thing is change. It's all about change, and that made me realize as well through my career that really that's what I've been doing. My whole career has been a change leadership career in whatever capacity I've been in. So surely I must be able to write about change and provide a how-to guide to leading change as well. But the difference being that when I wrote the Elemental Workplace, there was virtually no other book about workplace available that wasn't a sort of picture book, really, or a travelogue. Whereas with change, there are, billions of books about change everywhere. I've gone from one extreme to the other, to a market with nothing, to a market that is completely crowded. And, I see new books about, heroic transformation coming out every week. So I'm also very aware that I'm in a very different place with this one than I possibly was with the last one. But this isn't a workplace book. It's completely applicable in workplace. You can use it as a workplace change how-to guide, but it's about any change anywhere whatsoever.
No, and it's great, and I look forward to reading it. And obviously, just for those who are watching, we are going to do a series where Neil and I will go through elements of the book and actually talk about some of the practical guidance that Neil does give. And so I'm excited to see it, and it's important to acknowledge that. Real estate folks, workplace professionals, we are agents of change, and the change does come way before we even think about the physical workspace. So it is important to clarify some of those things. Now you are an avid writer, a blogger. You have a very unique tone in how you do things. You always seem to somehow get music context into everything you write, and I'm sure it's intentional. Maybe not. Maybe it's subconscious. But you did write a piece about the watercooler, the Confessions of a Watercolor, that I just want to touch upon, because in essence, it's a love story almost. Like we're missing the watercooler's missing the employees, the people speaking. Now, did you do this tongue in cheek in a sense of we maybe value the watercooler too much given the environment we're in, or is this something your perspective that you think we're actually we are missing the water cooler too much?
I think the sort of crux of it really is, and it came from I was watching someone else's Twitter exchange, probably far too late in the evening when I should have had my phone switched off for my own well-being. But it just, when I sort of put my phone down, I just suddenly had that moment of realization that we're talking about two entirely different things when we talk about this, because the amount of times we've seen in the last 6 months, there's probably more sort of mentions of the watercooler on the internet in the last 6 months than we probably ever had in all of the history of it preceding, because that's been sort of pretty much offered as a reason that people need to be back in the physical workplace. And it's one of the chance encounter, if you like, is we can make chance connections on things like Twitter, but the chance encounter is something that is very much an aspect of the physical workplace. But I think what I got to was that there's a big difference between importance and significance. I think the water cooler interactions, or wherever they may be, whether it's at the cafe or the photocopier or the shredder, or just walking through a space, or even being in close proximity in the office, just purely working in proximity can lead to those kind of interactions. They're important because they usually focus on the small things in our lives, and one of the things I say in the post is that, as this, or rather the water cooler says, is that it's I hear that is often the sort of the first 3 words of many of these interactions. People are looking to fill in gaps. They're looking for validations. They're looking for just sort of testing something they may have heard, or just seeing if someone knows something a little more than they do. And very often these are related to more personal matters as well, or more human matters. So they're extremely important in our lives, because how else would we have these? Where else would we have these? What's really been going on the last 6 months is most of the time we haven't been having them. They have been absent from our lives, but they're not significant in the way that the Maya memorandum suggested that everyone at Yahoo's got to come back to the office because these water cooler moments create innovation and they lead to big things. They in all probability they don't lead to big things. They may sow the seeds. They may create they may very slowly build the trust we need to be able to open out to one another in ways that are beneficial to the organization or to ourselves. But in themselves they're not significant in the way that corporate hype has had us believe. So I think we need to separate those two ideas. The importance is one thing, the significance is another thing. If a water cooler interaction could be both important and significant, I'd love to hear about it, because we hear very few tales of them being significant, but lots of justification for them as something that's important in our lives.
No, that's a very important distinction that you just made, and I really do love that. And there was so much more we wanted to get to, but time's up already, Neil. And it's just
You're kidding?
It's just flown by. Wow. And folks, we will be bringing Neil back, and we have already scheduled time to come back, and we will dig into a lot of this. And I do encourage you to. There's links below to reach out to Neil. Be it on LinkedIn, where he actually also issues a blog. I think each week he issues one, and maybe more regularly than that. And we've also put in a link to a YouTube video that Open Source Workplace created based on the Elemental Workplace. So where we provided a summary and an animation, so you can in 12 minutes capture what the essence of the book is. But I do encourage you to sort of go through, read the book, and take the lessons and look at through the lens of today and the change that need to be put in place today. So all the questions that we have about the future of workplace, the future of work, look through those lenses, use that framework that Neil has articulated in the book, and really, and other element actually you do provide in the book, Neil, is a huge list of questions that people can actually use and run through in that framework, which is really, really good. So, but look, thank you, Neil. I appreciate your time today. I appreciate you coming on Open Source Workplace, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for the invitation. Great to be here. Really enjoyed it. And I'd quite like to carry on, but
me
time's
too.
pressing. So
Me too.
thanks, everyone.
Me too. All right, cheers. Thank you.